You're listening to a 3CR podcast created in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.
Slavery is back.
Welcome to a place where private business profit from a captive labour force, yet pennies are spent on medical services to a population in which the Indigenous, the poor and the mentally ill are overrepresented. Where isolation, humiliation and degradation are facts of life. Welcome to prison.
It depends who's telling the story, I suppose. The prisoners would have one view, the people who work in the prison system would have another, and I think it's up to people to decide where the truth is.
Give government propaganda and the media spin doctors the flick. And check out Doin' Time for news, views and tunes on prison issues from Guantanamo Bay to Christmas Island to prisons and detention centres everywhere. Every Monday at 4 p.m. on your community radio 3CR.
We are still fired up and we're still talking about revolution.
Hello and welcome to the Doin' Time show. This is 3CR Community Radio, 855 AM on the dial, streaming live on www.3cr.org.au. This is Marisa and I'll be taking you through until 5 o'clock this evening. And I'm still doing the show remotely from home. The cases are down to zero, but we are still in the middle of a pandemic. And the Doin' Time show has worked extensively, in particular with First Nations people, to highlight some of the economic inequalities and also some of the problems that have been experienced both in prison and in custody. First up on the show, we're going to be speaking with Lydia Thorpe, who has replaced Richard Di Natale as Green Senator for Victoria. And Lydia has been on our show quite a few times on the show, and she is an Aboriginal activist and a Gunai and Gunditjmara woman. And we're going to be speaking with her shortly, hopefully about Djapurong, what's happening with the trees, or the no trees, no treaty, basically. And we'll be speaking with her about what her goals are as a senator. And then after that, we'll be speaking with Anthony Kelly from Kensington, Flemington Community Legal Centre, and we're going to be speaking with him about police investigating police and looking at a report that Mr. Daniel Andrews has been avoiding, and there have been massive delays in regards to this particular report, which has passed through the Senate, to look at some of the independent investigations that should be happening with police and is not happening. And then after that, we'll be speaking with Lucy Honan in regards to a protest that happened at the Mantra Hotel on Saturday. There are countless detainees that are being locked up not only in hotels but also in other detention centres all over Australia and also offshore, and in particular as a high risk, they're in high risk of getting coronavirus in the pandemic. Lucy Honan is from the Refugee Action Collective in Victoria. So coming up shortly, we'll be speaking with Lydia Thorpe.
Hi, we're the Marindas and you're listening to 3CR Community Radio 855 AM.
This lasting delusion about children trapped in tunnels. That's how we got Aussie Q, it seems, and now everything else. I mean, now it's just a 6-month pipeline from that to Australians who live in this alternate American fantasy land where they post about Donald Trump all the time. So its ability to, via Save the Children stuff, to get a whole range of different political persuasions in is what I found fascinating, you know. I talk a lot in the Aussie Q videos about how your auntie, she might not be that far right-wing now, but she might be quite left. She might just be a spiritual hippie type. But there's this broad appeal to things like Save the Children and Great Awakenings. There's almost a hippie-like quality to it, particularly when you tone down the whole MAGA element of traditional Q. And it's getting people in there. But Q is not just a conspiracy theory, is it? It is this conspiracy theory that is meant to drag you right after a few months. So your auntie's going to be talking about Make Australia Great Again in 6 months if she isn't right now.
You're listening to Radical Radio 3CR.
Have you heard it on the news about this fascist groove thing? Evil men with racist views spreading all across the land.
They're pulling on the boots in Brazil and wiping off the eggshells in Moorabbin. Fascism's on the march and we say, yeah, nah.
Yena Pasaran is a new weekly program on 3CR dedicated to tracking this rise in Australia, Aotearoa and all around our increasingly warm little globe.
Every Thursday at 4:30pm, we'll be talking to writers and fighters about some angry blighters.
Brothers, sisters, we don't need that fascist groove thing. Brothers, sisters.
What we're dealing with here is a total lack of respect for the law.
Tune in to Done by Law.
An informal and irreverent look at the law. Critical insights and analysis from diverse community perspectives.
Done by Law, 6 p.m. Tuesdays.
And you've just tuned into the Doing Time show. It's approximately 4:06. We're still trying to get on to Lydia Thorpe, but in the meantime, stay tuned and listen to a song by Archie Roach called Charcoal Lane.
Side by side, we'd walk along to the end of Gertrude Street. Then we'd top all in muster for a quart of wine. Thick or thin, right or wrong, in the cold and in the heat, we'd cross over Smith Street to the end of the line. Then we'd laugh and sing, do anything to take away the pain, trying to keep it down as it first went round in Charcoal Lane.
Spinning yarns and telling jokes, now the wine is tasting good as it's getting closer and closer to its end. Have a sip and roll some smokes. We smoke tailor-mades if we could, or we just make do with some city street blend. Then we'd all chuck in and we'd start to grin when we had enough to do it again. But if things got tight, then we'd have to buy the Charcoal Lane. Up Gertrude Street, we'd walk once more with just a few cents short, and we'd stop at the builders to see who we could see. Then we'd bite around until we'd score a flagon of McWilliams port, enough to take away our misery. Then we'd all get drunk, oh so drunk, and maybe a little insane. Then we'd stagger home all alone
I'm a survivor of Charcoal Lane.
You're listening to 3CR Community Radio 855 AM. Visit the 3CR website at 3cr.org.au/podcast to hear the most recent recording from each show, or 3cr.org.au/streaming to listen live.
And you're back with the Doing Time show. It's approximately 11 minutes past 4, and unfortunately we weren't able to get on to Lydia Thorpe. Not quite sure what's happened, but we'll endeavour to get her on next week and talk about all that. But in the meantime, before we speak with Anthony Kelly, I think what I'll do is I'll read out an article from The Guardian about Lydia, because it is terribly important. She's the first Aboriginal senator in Victoria, and I'll just read out from The Guardian. Lydia Thorpe is Victoria's first Aboriginal senator, urges end to deaths in custody and mass incarceration. And there's a photo of her in The Guardian standing with Greens leader Adam Bennett, who says, she's mentioning how deaths in custody is really important. So she also mentions that Australia must reverse the entrenched economic inequality that this pandemic has highlighted. So I'll just keep reading here. Australia's failures towards First Nations people have become entrenched through decades of inaction, Victoria's first Aboriginal senator has declared, while vowing to right these wrongs. Lydia Thorpe, who has attended her first Greens party room meeting, is set to be named as its First Nations and Justice spokesperson. And she said that Australia's failures was not just a result of a few bad policy decisions. If we're to right these wrongs, we need to fix the system, said Thorpe, who has entered the Senate after the retirement of the former Greens leader Richard Di Natale. That means ending deaths in custody and the mass incarceration of First Nations peoples, righting the wrongs of the past and moving forward through treaty and reversing the entrenched economic inequality that this pandemic has highlighted. Thorpe struck a hopeful note, however, saying the Black Lives Matter movement had empowered communities around the world to demand justice for First Nations people and people of colour. The comments come as the Greens signal that they intend to push for a national strategy to counter Australia's growing tide of far-right nationalism and tackle systemic racism. This year, the heads of spy agency ASIO and the Australian Federal Police have both acknowledged the rising threat posed by far-right extremism in Australia, prompting Labor to call on the government to ensure it is adequately funding programs to counter violent extremism across the extremist spectrum. The leader of the Greens, Adam Bennett, said the past 2 years had seen the far right emboldened in Australian politics. That meant it was no longer sufficient for political leaders to simply preach acceptance of diversity. Aboriginal activist Lydia Thorpe, as was emphasised earlier, replaced Richard Di Natale as Green Senator for Victoria. We need to actively prevent hate speech through education, take action against media that uncritically promotes hate, improve standards in our parliament, and dismantle the racist structures that fail to deliver First Nations people's justice, Bennett said. He said the New South Wales Senator, Mirin Fedordi, would be appointed to a newly created anti-racism portfolio with the goal of sharpening the fight against a toxic surge of the anti-immigrant fringe. Cordy said Australia had not yet grappled with being the country that raised the Christchurch killer. She said the party would take the fight to the far right and their cheerleaders in Parliament and the media to build a proactively anti-racist movement. That effort would require a range of elements, including introduction of strong hate speech laws, allocation of greater resources to counter the far right, the launch of a national anti-racism campaign, and efforts to improve diversity in public life. The institutions that are meant to protect us haven't just failed, they've become captive to the hate they're meant to fight, Cordy said. Any nation where police officers feel comfortable with flashing white supremacist hand gestures is not one where people of colour can feel safe. A Victorian officer was photographed last year making a hand gesture while policing a climate change protest outside a mining conference in Melbourne, but police denied it was the white power symbol. The pandemic has heightened concerns about radicalisation and racism. Earlier this year, more than 80,000 people signed a Change.org petition denouncing racist attacks on Asian Australians during COVID-19 and urging Scott Morrison and other political leaders to call for national unity. The Prime Minister has said he deplores racist attacks. In June, the Liberal Senator Andrew Bragg joined opposition parties in condemning anti-Asian racism in Australia and cowardly attacks during the pandemic. The same month, Australian senators overwhelmingly united to block Pauline Hanson's attempt to put forward an inflammatory All Lives Matter motion. And that's the end of that article, and I think we'll just go into another announcement. I believe that it's almost time for Anthony Kelly to come onto the show now to talk about organising an independent investigation system with IBAC to counteract police brutality and racial profiling.
You know, there's people, like you said, have been on casual for 7 years. Well, it's supposed to be casual employment. People want full-time jobs. They don't want to be sitting there casual, not knowing they're going to get any days, any leave or whatsoever. Especially, you look at all the casuals in our industry at the moment, they're sitting home. You know, people want full-time employment, and they should be entitled to full-time employment.
And look at all the people who were used and abused as casuals in the aged care sector and all the problems that are facing people now and all the deaths that are following.
In the meatworks, a lot of that's casuals, labour hire, you know, we've got blokes travelling around, you know. We want full-time positions and, you know, and people want it. We want to be full-time employed. You want to have your Christmas holidays. You want to have time with your family. But when you're a casual, you get none of that.
You're listening to 3CR Community Radio 855 AM on digital and online. 3CR Radical Radio.
Hi, Mans here from the Djapirong Embassy. On October the 26th, after 2.5 years of defending sacred women's country, the Embassy, family, friends and supporters were forcibly removed from country by Victoria Police. The Andrews State Government, alongside Major Roads Projects Victoria, have begun their violent attack to desecrate the sovereign lands of the Djapirong to make way for the duplication of the Western Highway between Buangor and Ararat. There are many old growth trees, one significant tree in particular, a 350-year-old yellow box gum, the directions tree. She's a placenta tree who holds the DNA of the Djapirong ancestors. She was felled by chainsaw at the hands of a government that is asking for a treaty with its First Peoples. The Embassy and its frontline protectors are calling out for your help.
To find out more, including how to get to the Embassy to help defend on the ground, visit the Djapirong Heritage Protection Embassy's Facebook page. Educate yourself, donate to their Chuff campaign, and spread the word. 3CR supports the Djapirong Heritage Protection Embassy. No trees, no treaty.
And you're back with the Doing Time show. No trees, no treaty indeed, and it is disappointing that we were unable to get onto Lydia Thorpe. I managed to read out some background of what was happening with the Greens and about her becoming senator. So hopefully we'll be able to speak with her next week. It's approximately 4:20, and we're going to be speaking shortly with Anthony Kelly, who is the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer of the Kensington Flemington Community Legal Centre, and we're going to be speaking with him about the push to having independent investigations of police and having a look at a report that was meant to have been looked at a long time ago, but apparently had gone through the upper house. Hello, Anthony. Welcome to the program.
Hi, Marisa. Thanks for having me.
It's lovely to have you. I hope. Do I need to correct your title, or is that right?
No, that's totally fine.
So for the past 2 years, the Andrews government has been sitting on an important report. Is that right? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about this for quite a while now. It's now 2 years since a joint parliamentary committee held public inquiries, and lots of us, including victims of police misconduct and agencies and Aboriginal legal services, put in lots of submissions and made representations to that inquiry. And the end result of that inquiry was this quite a comprehensive and detailed outline of what an independent investigative system looks like in Victoria. That's going to, that's far more independent and transparent and capable of investigating police human rights abuses. And but unfortunately, the Victorian government has just sat on it ever since. They had an election, they got in again, they didn't deal with it. Then there was a Royal Commission called into about the Lawyer X controversy. A lawyer being turned by police and used as a witness against her clients. And so that Royal Commission has formed a bit of an excuse for the government not to act on the recommendations. And so that's one. So yeah, we've been waiting basically 2 years for any sort of indication that the government's going to act on these really critical recommendations.
It is very critical, and apparently this report made 69 significant recommendations, didn't it, to improve the transparency, impartiality, effectiveness and efficiency of how allegations of police misconduct are dealt with. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So the Police Accountability Project, through the research of Tamara Hopkins and other people, we've long analysed what a really good independent investigative model looks like. We've looked at Northern Ireland and Canada and the UK and then what's happening in the US. And it's pretty clear that an independent investigative model that meets 5 basic human rights benchmarks is what's needed, what's critical, and what meets international standards. And those benchmarks include, promptness, able to investigate a serious police misconduct allegation really quickly, transparency so that it's, visible and people can see it, and victims and everyone involved gets to know what's going on and the outcomes of that investigation. That it's victim-centred, that families and the victims themselves have a say in what's going on and are treated respectfully throughout the process, which doesn't at all happen at the moment. And that it's hierarchically, institutionally and culturally independent from police. That's really critical. So as we know, IBAC investigate only a tiny percentage of police misconduct allegations, and even deaths in custody, in police custody, are investigated by a police investigator appointed by the coroner. So in so many really serious police misconduct cases, including shootings and serious assaults and abuses and human rights abuses such as widespread discriminatory policing, are so far either not investigated or only investigated by police themselves. So it's entirely inadequate and inappropriate. And this report identified that. This report actually acknowledged our concerns and the concerns of the wider community about this, and recommended a system that essentially meets those 5 benchmarks that I went through. And that's why
Anthony, who wrote the report?
It was written by this joint parliamentary committee. It was called the IMARC committee at the time, but now it's transformed into the Oversight and Integrity Committee. So it's made up of MPs from all the parties. And that's why it's interesting, because it is, it was a widespread concern. It had a Liberal National Party. Kim Wells actually headed up the inquiry from the Liberal National Party, and it had Greens representative on it and Labor representatives on it. So it had so much potential to get through Parliament had the government acted on it. Now, however, what's been stalling it is not only this Royal Commission, but it's pretty obvious that the stalling's to do with because the Police Association and Victoria Police Command have essentially said no. They've opposed these reforms, and I think that's the big sticking block.
I'm just having a look through some of my notes, and I remember interviewing you about this 2 years ago.
Yeah, that's right. It's something we've been calling for. Oh, look, it's something that the community legal centres, including ours, have been calling for pretty much 40 years now. It was a key recommendation in the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody over 40 years ago. It's been something that's been called for in just about every deaths in custody investigation. So many law reform and coronial inquests have recommended independent investigations. And it's something that has been, its core. The Tanya Day family, in their struggle throughout the coronial inquest over the last couple of years, have been stridently calling for independent investigations and highlighted all the problems of having a police investigator investigating the death of their mum. So it's not new news. It's just it's one of those systemic issues that it's so difficult to get movement on.
I mean, it's interesting that often some matters are referred to IBAC, and it's meant to be the watchdog, isn't it? It's meant to be the independent, broad-based anti-corruption commission.
That's right.
It actually isn't in theory, is it, Anthony? I mean, wouldn't it be better for funding and powers to be improved, and then there'd be like a new police corruption and misconduct division within IBAC?
Yeah, so we were discussing this over the years within the Police Accountability Project. We were initially quite, a little bit agnostic about whether we wanted IBAC to be the main investigative body or actually have a new body. And we've had lots of concerns with IBAC over the years about their relationship with police and the lack of resources. But we've come around. IBAC are getting better at their investigative processes and their willingness to take on their own motion investigations. So IBAC at the moment does have the powers that we need to see. They can conduct their own investigations where they see fit. They can conduct systemic reviews when they see fit. And they can also prosecute police. They need more arrest powers and have called for them. But the main problem with that they face at the moment is a lack of resourcing. So they don't have the staff or the personnel to carry out more investigations than they currently are, and they're investigating more than they ever used to. They took on the hares and hyenas case, partly because it got so much media attention at the time, and they've also taken on the recent case where the man's head was stomped on in Epping after after visiting the hospital. And then, he's also ran by police, and then his head was stomped on by police. So they, within a day that they'd take on that as an investigation. They've been doing a lot more investigations, but they can't do any more. And they recognise, and we recognise, that there's a lot more that they need to be doing. And so we've come round to the idea that the most likely thing is that, and this is what the Parliamentary Committee found, is that they recommended a dedicated police misconduct and corruption division to be established within IBAC so that it could really focus on police misconduct issues.
But it'd be really interesting to see if the 69 recommendations would be implemented. And I suppose my question is, are there lots of police in IBAC investigating? Wouldn't it still be police investigating police?
So there needs to be restrictions on how many former police are in the investigative team, and there's been various recommendations. We recommend that only a tiny percentage, just no more than 20%, or I think 10% we might have, is former police. IBAC already have a policy of not recruiting former Victoria police, but that's one of the problems that they face, is having civilian investigators who aren't former police. And what we argue is that there's a big range of skills and people out there, aircraft crash investigators and forensic investigators who don't necessarily have police backgrounds but are perfectly capable of doing these sorts of investigations. So that's something that independent investigative bodies around the world face, and it is a critical issue about not having former police or too many former police in any of these bodies.
It's quite despicable in that, I could list countless examples about, for example, specifically with Aboriginal deaths in custody with Auntie Tanya Day in Victoria, and then you've got Lex Watton, what happened with Cameron DiMaggi, and Lex Watton was jailed as a result of it, charged with riot. That was a bit of a domino effect. I suppose what I'm saying is, this report has actually passed the upper house, and yet there's been a big silence about it, and we need to actually crack that open, don't we?
Yeah, we do. And the government's been, as I said, using this Royal Commission as an excuse, and that excuse runs out on the 30th of November when the Royal Commission hands down its findings. So the Royal Commission may indeed recommend strengthening IBAC and resourcing it properly to do this sort of independent investigations, or it may not. But in either case, the Victorian government needs to bite the bullet on this, and it needs to basically take a stand about who controls the police, and who controls, democracy in Victoria, really. Because if the Parliament needs to make a decision about how police are held to account in our state, and not the Police Association or Police Command.
Yeah. And
even if they say no, then the government's still got to act, and making sure that we've got an accountability system that ends impunity and can reduce the amount of human rights abuses that we see all too regularly.
Well, indeed. And in fact, Anthony, the Australian government will be facing scrutiny and many other aspects of its human rights record when it appears before the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva for its major 4-yearly human rights review.
Yeah. I'm very cynical about that. The United Nations has said several times that we need independent investigations, and the Victorian government did a range of things after the Karina Horvath decision came through back in 2015, and that was good. It responded, and that was part of the inquiry. It was part of its response, but it still needs to put it into legislation as quickly as possible. And just responding to that massive surge in an outcry and anger that we saw in June in the Black Lives Matter global movement, and that's something that this government's got to respond to if it's going to have any sort of say on systemic racism and institutionalised racism in society. It's got to tackle the impunity the police have currently.
Too much impunity and a lot of lack of accountability. And it's interesting that during the lockdown, the report was further delayed, wasn't it?
It delayed the coronial inquiry. It delayed the coronial inquiry. It would have been handed down, I think, much earlier in the year. So, so now it's the 30th of December, and we've written to parliamentarians. There's a lot of interest in Parliament already. There's already been motions passed in the upper house. So there is a bit of pressure on the government to finally act on these reports and finally act on independent investigations. So we've got our fingers crossed. But as you say, whether or not that's enough, we just don't know.
Absolutely. And what can the community do to help to speed this up?
We haven't got any action letters or anything underway. I think when the Royal Commission comes out, it's going to be another peak period. So if everyone could call on their local members to act on independent investigations, that would be the most helpful thing at this stage. And also back up, everyone who's calling for independent investigations, the families of deaths in custody, victims all around Australia have been calling for this. There's a similar inquiry at the moment going on in New South Wales. It just had public hearings last month. And that's, it's focusing on deaths in custody, whereas ours focused on, police misconduct across the board.
Sure.
But we're hoping there that, it's potentially New South Wales will leapfrog and start acting on deaths in custody investigations sooner than Victoria at this rate.
I hope so. I mean, it's because it really isn't. In some ways, yes, we do need reform, but it's not just about IBAC. It's also about having civilian review boards and making police far more accountable and not having them having so much power.
Yeah, that's right. And also the ending of impunity, the independent investigations is only one peg in our toolbox sort of thing. It's we need to also end this inexorable expansion of policing and the expansion of programs such as the PSOs, the Protective Service Officers, and the driving of prison expansion in Victoria. So the accountability system is only one aspect of what we need to look at. Stopping the expansion is also incredibly critical.
Absolutely. Anthony, thank you so much for coming onto the program, and I'm hoping we can continue this discussion at a later date.
That's okay, and look, people can always head to the website, thepoliceaccountability.org.au, for more detail on any of this stuff.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Marisa.
Thanks. Take care.
I really am not understanding why people aren't seeing the fact that prisons are an integral part of a public health response to a pandemic. Like you, I'm really concerned about whether the data is being released very honestly about illnesses within prison. I have suspicions it's not, but really we need very strong leadership in this country that actually cares about people inside our most vulnerable populations inside. That's what we need, and that's not what we're getting right now.
We need to keep radical voices on air. Subscribe now.
Go to 3cr.org.au/subscribe or call the station on 9419 8377.
And you're back with the Doing Time show, and we're going to be speaking now with Lucy Honan from the Refugee Action Collective Victoria. How are you, Lucy?
Good, thanks, Marisa. How are you?
Oh, not bad, not bad. For a pandemic, it's not over yet. Lucy, yeah, I was just having a look at what happened on Saturday with the action outside the Mantra Hotel. Can you just tell us who the speakers were and just give a little bit of a report back on the protest and just a little bit of background as well?
Okay, sure. So getting a little bit of background feedback, though, while I'm talking, so I'll do my best to talk over that. I'm just hearing myself echoing.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I'm doing the radio remotely from home, so there is a little bit of technical stuff going on there. I'm hoping that's not going to be too annoying for you.
I'll just try and ignore it.
Yeah.
But so what we had organised on the weekend was about 150 people protesting outside the Mantra Hotel in Preston. And as 3CR listeners would know, the Mantra Hotel is playing host to the detention of refugees who have been medically evacuated from Papua New Guinea and Nauru. The Australian government medically evacuated them, but they've been held in detention in hotels across Australia for about a year now. Some of them are receiving medical treatment, but some of them have not been receiving medical treatment. So there's about 65 refugees in the Mantra Hotel. We protested outside the front of the hotel on Saturday to demand that those guys be released, but also that any of the refugees and asylum seekers who have been living in the community throughout the pandemic actually get access to Centrelink, so JobKeeper or JobSeeker, which they've been excluded from on a very discriminatory basis. So the protest was excellent. We had lots of people who were really keen to, post-lockdown get out and show their solidarity with the guys in Mantra and let the government know that we haven't gone away and that the lockdown didn't kill our protest movement. Unfortunately, though, we had a lot of hostility and harassment from the police who have, as we know, been given extreme powers throughout the lockdown. So we had tried to comply in every possible way with the COVID restrictions. At first, we tried to negotiate with police to have separate groups of 9 spread out around the Mantra, which is a big block of land. So, it would be along Bell Street, Hotham Street and behind and across the road in the park and so on. But the police refused to let us do that. They said that it would be gathering for a common purpose. We said to the police, well, people are gathering for a common purpose at High Point Shopping Centre and it's more than 10 people, but they rejected that. So they said that they would fine us if we did that plan. So we came up with another plan, which was to rotate people through in groups of 10. So everyone was texted a 10-minute time slot to show up outside the Mantra Hotel, and across 2.5 hours we had groups of 10 show up. And that worked really well. We had speakers from inside the Mantra, so Ismail Hussein, who's been detained there, Jana Favero from the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre spoke about their campaigns and advocacy. And we also had Aaron Mulvaganam from the Tamil Refugee Council. And that was really awesome. There was a lot of good energy and vibes, as I said. We got some great media. But unfortunately, the police did harass us throughout the entire protest. They were taking people's numbers. They told people that they needed to give them their number for contact tracing, which is just untrue. And they also threatened quite a few people with fines just for standing on a footpath more than 1.5 metres beyond anybody else without giving them an opportunity to walk away or to get away from the scene. So we're really, we've had a hard time with the police outside the Mantra and all throughout the lockdown with their attempt to use the restrictions to restrict our right to protest. And we can see, we saw from the weekend that we're facing a bit of an uphill battle. We will still have to keep organising together across different protest movements for our right to protest.
I just find that really galling that police would ask for numbers for contact tracing.
It was false because we had everybody had to register to come to the protest so that we could organise the groups in groups of 9. So we said to the police, we've got contact details if anybody, if there is a COVID situation, which is very unlikely given the situation and that we're outside and we're in such kind of restricted circumstances, but we've got their numbers. But the police, just as an act of intimidation, were going around asking for people to tell them their details.
Did they give them?
Some people did, and there was confusion because I think people think, the police asking me these details and I have to give these details to them, especially if the police are saying things as they were to some people, you have to give us your details because we think that you are breaking the regulations and breaking the law. Whereas other people, they were saying, no, we weren't at all. Of course, it was ridiculous. But other people, they were saying that it's about contact tracing. So there was quite a lot of confusion on the day about, well, do we need to give them? Do we not? Lots of people did successfully refuse, though.
This really needs to be referred to the Melbourne Activist Legal Support and to see if a workshop can be done about knowing your rights, because really, under these circumstances, if people are adhering to the restrictions and they're going in groups of 9, the police shouldn't be doing that.
Absolutely not. And MALs have been so supportive throughout the whole pandemic as observers and so on. And we hope that we can, as you say, get a workshop and some info from them for future RAC protests.
Absolutely, because, I've actually done quite a lot of work with Mel, a lot of media work. And if you ever want to have a look at some of the panel discussions that have been on the show, do so. And there's
I will do.
Thanks,
Marisa. Yes.
It's approximately 4:45 and you're listening to an interview with Lucy Honan from the Refugee Action Collective. So basically the mantra, Mitre, Best Western Fawkner, and all detention centres must close. And this has been after 7 years. Refugees have to be released into the community on permanent protection visas, don't they?
Absolutely.
I mean, look at this. There's all these medical evacuations. I mean, some of these people, and isn't it true, Lucy, we do need to highlight this to listeners, that people who are imprisoned in the mantra were initially brought here as a result of the Medivac legislation, which was repealed. Is that correct?
That's right, yeah. So this is we understand this to be the government's revenge. The medical evacuation legislation was one against the government that was forced on them by the movement and, parliamentarians who ultimately reflected the view of the movement that we wanted the men off Manus and Nauru. And we got that Medivac legislation in that forced the government to bring people here if doctors said they needed to be brought to safety. So, a couple of hundred men did, not just men, but people were evacuated, but it didn't, the letter of the law didn't say that they needed to be treated when they were brought here. So people were brought here, but as I said before, have been living locked up. The guys in the mantra are telling us that they've been in there for 23 hours a day. Maybe they leave their room for 1 hour, walk up and down the tiny corridor, maybe play some ping pong, and then back in the room. It's just horrific, with no end in sight, no commitment to medical care on the part of the government. And those people who do actually get access to medical care or have to go to emergency, because we know that the rates of suicide and self-harm have skyrocketed during the course of the pandemic. When they've gone to their medical appointment, upon return to the mantra, they're being detained in isolation in the basement of the mantra under the guise of COVID safety, that it's quarantine. But the guards who took them, who bring them back and forth, are obviously not meant to be quarantined. They're not quarantined at all. So it's another form of punishment that anybody, accessing medical care is punished then with isolation. And as I'm sure you can understand, a lot of the medical care they need is psychiatric as well as physical. To be punished like that, to know that you're going to face isolation for 2 weeks if you access medical care is just another form of torture, really.
Absolutely. And also, it looks as if here that RAC has highlighted in the media release about the plight of refugees and asylum seekers living in the community. And they've also been cruelly excluded from JobKeeper and job seeker payments, haven't they?
Yeah, that's right. So, this is at the beginning of the pandemic when the Morrison government announced JobKeeper and job seeker would be increased and introduced. They made very careful decision and a very conscious decision to exclude all people on temporary visas, and that includes many asylum seekers and refugees, as we know. And the result has just been devastating, because throughout the pandemic, most of the charities that refugees and asylum seekers have been relying on have been at reduced capacity as well. So as I was saying at the protest yesterday, on Saturday, Teachers and Teachers for Refugees Network is aware of lots of families where kids have been reliant on the school to eat, to be clothed. They're completely reliant on it. But these are the rare people who do have, they're plugged in that way to a school or to some kind of social safety net. There are lots of people who just haven't been, and the destitution is horrific, and it's calculated on the part of the government. When we've seen the billions that they're willing to pour into corporate Australia for them to survive the pandemic, but they're not willing to support people on temporary visas, it's ruthless of them, and a calculated racism that we know they're capable of.
And not only is it ruthless, but you've also got your Murdoch and mainstream media that are doing a lot of peddling of ridiculous paraphernalia hate speech, whereby you've got some community members in this country who are saying, but asylum seekers and refugees don't deserve JobKeeper and job seeker, and I'm a citizen, so I deserve to have medical care and other things over refugees. And it just really, it's such a divide and conquer law, isn't it?
Absolutely. That's exactly what it's designed for. Yeah, to make people feel like they're squabbling over the scraps. And you know, it's a punitive policy as well. It's a deterrent policy to make sure that any refugees or people who've been displaced around the world from the kind of horrific wars that we've seen Australia engage in, you know, another reason for displacement, to send a warning signal to them: don't come here. You know, we'll leave you absolutely destitute, and the cruelty won't stop when you leave detention. That's the sort of government that we've got. It's not the sort of society. I mean, I think when people become aware of what's happening, yes, so for some people the racism resonates and they form an attachment to that explanation that, you know, these people deserve it. But for many people, it's just there's a sense of solidarity that we've all been screwed during this pandemic, that we've all been kind of, you know, had the wool thrown over our eyes, and while the corporates get their massive bailouts, we've been dealing with, you know, the crumbs from the table. So I think that, there's an attempt on the part of this government to be divisive and that divide and conquer, as you say, but I feel like we do have a really strong refugee rights movement in this country that we need to kind of put back together, remobilise on the streets and reach out to people to let them know that this is happening.
I'm hoping so. I mean, 3CR really does have quite a lot of amazing listeners, and what you're saying is true. There is a lot of solidarity. However, you know, we need to do more outreach as a movement, because I'm actually in touch with a lot of people in this country that are not in solidarity, and they need to be reached out to.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. They need to know what's happening, and they need to know what the alternative is, and that, you know, we are stronger together.
Basically, too, that Premier Daniel Andrews needs to do two things. He needs to end the discriminatory restrictions on political activity, and he needs to also end his silence on what's happening in Victoria with refugees. Isn't it correct, Lucy, that federal colleagues have spoken repeatedly against the Scott Morrison's indefinite refugees in Victoria?
So, there have been some critics, definitely. So there's, you know, Jed Carney, recently elected. Giles has also spoken out against the mantra. We need more of that. But what we wanted to draw attention to as RAC Victoria is just Daniel Andrews' really discriminatory response to the restrictions. So like I said earlier, you know, you can have hundreds of people packed together in a shopping centre. I come to work and there's 1,750 people in school buildings every day, but groups of 10 outside the mantra in the open air, 1.5 metres apart from each other, and the police are, you know, on us, all over us, and also kind of setting goalposts in the negotiations about what we can do, and then resetting them again on the day, making us really trying to intimidate and repress protest movements. So we really are concerned that Andrews, you know, has got lots of double standards in terms of this roadmap out of the restrictions. We want that to lift. We want the right to protest again.
Absolutely, particularly because cases are down to zero. There's been no community transmission, and, you know, with his own mouth, Daniel Andrews has actually said that you can go out for exercise and there's not really a limit, is there? I mean, you know, as long as you're in a group of 10, if you can exercise in groups of 10 and have a picnic at the park or sit on a bench, why can't you go to the Mantra Hotel? Who cares what the purpose is? Why would police care?
That's right. Well, we know why they care, but you know,
I'm being a little bit.
They need to back off.
Yeah. Well, that's right. That's exactly right. It's approximately 4:54. We better be out of here, Lucy. Thank you so much for coming onto the program, and we'll talk soon.
Bye.
Thanks so much.
You're listening to 3CR Community Radio 855 AM on digital and online. 3CR Radical Radio.
Music has been at the heart of the city of Darebin's rich cultural history. Beats, Ballads and Ballrooms is an audio tour that covers the history of country, rock, punk, cabaret, rebettica, folk and traditional music styles in the Darebin area. Experienced as a walking tour via the Echoes app or listen to at home via the web. The tour brings listeners to 15 locations to reveal the songs and stories behind the city's venues, past and present. Visit beatsballadsanballrooms.com for more information. Beats, Ballads and Ballrooms was commissioned and funded by Darebin Arts for Hyperlocal.
A 3CR supporter.
And you're back with the Doing Time show, and we're going to be going out now with our theme song, Black Fella, White Fella by the Rumpy Band. And stay tuned every Monday from 4 to 5 for the Doing Time show. Okay, bye. Take care of each other.
As long as you are true.